I had been looking forward to this Saturday all week, the sweet scent of charcoal and mesquite mingling in the air, the soft sizzle of steaks, ribs, and burgers on the grill, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from doing something simple, ordinary, and completely mine. My backyard, fenced with weathered cedar planks, was my sanctuary, the one place I could escape the endless noise of work emails, HOA notices, and the passive-aggressive undertones that seemed to float through the air every time I stepped outside. I had meticulously planned the afternoon, inviting a few close friends over for a casual barbecue, nothing fancy, just the kind of gathering where laughter and the occasional toast to small victories could fill the golden afternoon. I arranged the table under the pergola, placing a vase of wildflowers I had picked that morning, and lined up paper plates, napkins, and condiments. The grill itself, a hefty black monster with chrome accents, gleamed in the sunlight, ready to roast, char, and sear with a precision only a grill master could appreciate. Smoke began to curl from the grill as I carefully placed the first slabs of marinated ribs, and I could hear the soft hiss of the fat hitting the flames, a sound as comforting as a favorite song. I leaned back, beer in hand, letting the sun warm my shoulders, feeling the deep satisfaction of being precisely where I wanted to be. That's when I noticed her, Karen. I didn't see her approach. She was always quiet about it, the type who slithered into the neighborhood with an air of self-importance, her designer sunglasses reflecting the late morning sun. Her heels clicked on the concrete path leading up to my yard, an oddly aggressive rhythm, like a warning drumbeat. She crossed my fence line without knocking, and I instinctively straightened, trying to ignore her. But Karen never ignored anyone, especially when she smelled an opportunity for chaos. Before I could utter a word, she leaned over the railing, pointing at the grill with the kind of horror reserved for disaster movies. "You can't do this. You can't have this here," she shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut the air between us. I frowned, trying to process the absurdity of the statement. This was my backyard, my property, my grill. I had checked the HOA guidelines 100 times. There was no law against cooking outdoors, no rule against inviting friends over for a simple meal. I opened my mouth to respond, to tell her politely that she had no authority here, but before the words could even form, her phone was out, fingers flying over the screen. "I'm calling 911, she announced triumphantly, as though alerting authorities to my barbecue would somehow prevent an apocalypse. I couldn't help the chuckle that escaped me. This was ridiculous. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the line minutes later, polite but confused, asking me to step outside and explain the situation. I did so calmly, leaning against the fence with my beer still in hand, trying to convey that no law was being broken, that this was merely a family-friendly gathering. Karen, however, was relentless, weaving a tale of imagined violations and dramatic exaggerations, painting my peaceful barbecue as a neighborhood crisis. I listened quietly, letting her words wash over me like a bad radio signal, until I noticed her husband, quiet, imposing, and far too still, standing behind her. I had never met the man before, but something in his posture and the glint of a badge tucked under his blazer caught my corner of my eye. Karen, flustered and flailing, was so focused on me, on proving her moral and legal superiority, that she hadn't realized her own husband's fingers were hovering near the handcuffs at his side. The absurdity of the situation struck me, the way life sometimes bends in ways you never anticipate. Here she was, weaponizing the law to stop my barbecue, oblivious that the real authority standing beside her could turn the situation entirely upside down. And then, as if the universe had decided I needed an exclamation point on this surreal tableau, her husband stepped forward. Calm, authoritative, and utterly unbothered, he intervened in a way that froze Karen mid-sentence, her indignation crashing into confusion. The dispatcher's voice was still in the background, asking questions that now seemed trivial compared to the unfolding scene before me. I watched, stunned, as Karen's carefully constructed outrage began to crumble, her attempts at control slipping like sand through her fingers. And in a move that would become the story retold for weeks at neighborhood gatherings, he placed her under arrest right there, not for anything I had done, but for a sudden, unrelated matter that had apparently been pending. The irony hit me like a punchline in a dark comedy. She had spent all her energy trying to assert dominance over my simple pleasure, and in doing so, exposed herself to the law in a way she never imagined. I laughed, quietly, not out of cruelty but out of the sheer absurdity of it all, the way a quiet Saturday afternoon with smoke curling over ribs could suddenly turn into a scene straight out of a twisted sitcom. My friends, now cautiously peeking over the fence, witnessed the spectacle too, Karen, flustered and red-faced, being led away while I raised my beer in a silent toast to the unpredictability of life and the subtle, delicious triumph of simply minding your own business. It was, without a doubt, the strangest barbecue I had ever hosted, and I knew deep down it would be one of the stories told and retold in the neighborhood for years to come. After the shocking arrest, the air in my backyard felt surreal, almost suspended, as if time itself had decided to pause and let me take in every absurd detail of the unfolding chaos. My friends, who had been hovering near the pergola, suddenly looked like extras in a live-action sitcom, their mouths open, unsure whether to laugh or call their own lawyers. I tried to regain some semblance of control over the situation, stepping away from the grill just enough to avoid any splatter from the sizzling ribs but keeping my beer in hand because, well, some things, like simple pleasures, must remain uninterrupted. I glanced over the fence, half expecting the neighborhood to gather like vultures drawn by a smell of scandal, but thankfully, the street remained surprisingly empty, leaving the spectacle contained within the boundaries of my yard. Meanwhile, the smoke from the barbecue twisted lazily into the blue sky, a surreal counterpoint to the tension gripping the little world I had created for myself. As Karen's husband, now firmly in his professional capacity, escorted her away, her protests ringing faintly through the suburban quiet, I felt a complex mix of relief, disbelief, and vindication. Not because I had won against her petty obsession with control, though, admittedly, that felt good, but because the absurdity of the situation crystallized in a way that was almost poetic. This wasn't just a minor HOA dispute, this was the universe conspiring to remind me that life has a twisted sense of humor, especially when you're trying to enjoy a simple barbecue in peace. I turned back to my friends, who had begun whispering among themselves, faces flushed with laughter, incredulity, and a hint of admiration for the sheer audacity of Karen's miscalculation. "I can't believe this," one of them muttered, shaking his head, as if confirming that reality itself had temporarily lost its grip. Another added, "Dude, your grill just survived a full-blown HOA crisis." I laughed along, the sound rich and unforced, because at that moment, I realized how rare it was to witness such a perfect collision of human hubris and cosmic irony. My attention returned to the grill, the ribs now sizzling with a slightly more intense aroma, the smoke curling upward as if celebrating the small but undeniable triumph of common sense over absurdity. I meticulously flipped the meat, the tactile pleasure of holding the tongs grounding me amidst the lingering tension, reminding me that, regardless of the chaos outside, the simple joy of cooking remained untouched. The conversation among my friends shifted, naturally, to speculation about what had just happened. Who knew her husband had authority like that? How long had he been waiting for a moment to assert it? And more importantly, how on earth did Karen not see it coming? I listened, chuckling quietly, savoring the combination of their excitement and confusion, all while carefully basting the ribs in a secret marinade I had perfected over years of trial and error. The sun began to dip slightly, casting long shadows across the yard, and the golden light bounced off the chrome edges of the grill, giving the scene an almost cinematic quality. I realized then that life has a funny way of teaching lessons. The minute you start to overreach, to meddle in someone else's affairs, you leave yourself wide open to consequences that are both immediate and utterly unexpected. Karen's audacious attempt to control my peaceful Saturday had been dismantled not by confrontation, but by the presence of someone far more authoritative than her, a quiet reminder that power exists in forms we often overlook until it's pointed directly at us. I poured another beer for myself, the cold liquid a stark contrast to the warm tension lingering in the air, and took a deep breath, letting the aroma of smoked meat, wood, and sunlight fill my lungs. My friends gradually began to relax, returning to the table I had set earlier, eager to dig in now that the bizarre interference had been removed. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, weekend plans, work gossip, and shared stories of minor suburban frustrations, I caught myself glancing toward the street, half expecting Karen to return in a final, dramatic attempt to reclaim her imagined victory. But she didn't. Instead, the quiet neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm, birds chirping, distant lawnmowers humming, and the occasional dog bark punctuating the serene suburban soundscape. I realized then that my barbecue had somehow transcended its humble purpose. It had become a stage for a story far larger than a simple meal. The act of grilling, of inviting friends into a space of warmth and casual enjoyment, had turned into an unintentional performance highlighting the ridiculous extremes of neighborly meddling. I let the tongs rest briefly as I surveyed the scene, plates stacked neatly, condiments lined up, and my friends laughing as they recounted the arrest with exaggerated hand gestures, each retelling amplifying the hilarity of the situation. I realized that, in a strange way, this moment would stay with all of us far longer than the taste of the perfectly grilled ribs. It would become a story, a legend even, retold at future gatherings, each retelling growing slightly more outrageous, more humorous, more emblematic of suburban absurdity. And yet, amid the laughter, the chaos, and the lingering smoke, there was a profound sense of calm. The calm that comes from knowing that, no matter how absurd or intrusive life may become, some things are yours to protect, your property, your peace, and the quiet pleasure of simple moments that are yours and yours alone. As the afternoon waned into a soft, glowing evening, I flipped the last of the burgers with a sense of satisfaction deeper than any culinary triumph. It was the satisfaction of having survived the storm of nonsense and emerging with laughter, good friends, and the unmistakable reminder that life sometimes rewards patience, humor, and simply standing your ground. By the time the sun began its final descent, painting the sky with streaks of amber and pink, the neighborhood had returned to its usual quiet, the world outside my fence continuing on its usual path while my little backyard remained a haven, a place where ribs sizzled, laughter rang out, and the absurdity of human nature could be observed and appreciated from a safe distance. I realized that moments like these, however chaotic in their execution, were what life was truly about, the unexpected surprises, the comic twists, and the small victories that leave you both humbled and amused. I took another sip of beer, letting the rich flavor linger on my tongue, while the smoke from the grill curled up toward the now purple sky, a symbolic reminder that even in the face of ridiculous interference, life, much like my barbecue, could be savored on my own terms, with a grin and an appreciative nod to the strange, wonderful unpredictability of it all. The evening settled in with a quiet, almost deceptive calm, the kind that precedes the next twist of fate, the kind that fools you into thinking life has returned to normal when, in reality, it's merely pausing for dramatic effect. I stood near the grill, letting the last embers of charcoal burn down to a soft glow, the lingering smell of smoked meat and wood mingling with the warm air, and I couldn't shake the sense that the neighborhood had shifted subtly while I wasn't looking. My friends, still seated under the pergola, nibbled at sides and sipped on beers, their laughter punctuated by occasional glances toward the street as though expecting Karen to return with vengeance freshly ignited. I knew that wasn't likely. Her husband had already ensured her arrest, and I imagined the paperwork, lectures, and neighborhood gossip that would follow, but the tension was palpable, the kind of tension that made even the most ordinary backyard seem like the stage of an epic, slow-moving drama. As I turned to flip the last few hot dogs, the faint sound of a car door slamming caught my attention. I looked up, squinting through the soft orange haze of sunset, and noticed another neighbor stepping out onto their porch, phone in hand, eyebrows raised in curiosity. Word travels fast in our neighborhood, there was no surprise there. Yet, seeing them silently observing, perhaps already texting everyone else about the chaos earlier, only amplified the surreal nature of the day. I exhaled slowly, savoring the smoke, the warm air, the the soft crackle of fading coals, and thought about how strange life had become, how one simple, quiet Saturday meant for grilling and enjoying company could spiral into a spectacle that neighbors would probably discuss for months over fences, during dog walks, or in passing grocery trips. The thought made me chuckle, the sound deep and rich, a blend of disbelief and amusement. It was impossible not to notice the peculiar dynamics now swirling around me, the residual tension from Karen's dramatics, the curious stares of other neighbors, the whispered comments floating on the soft evening breeze, and the quiet, authoritative aura of her husband still lingering in my mind. I replayed the moments in my head, the exact way he had stepped forward, the calm, deliberate authority in his movements, and the subtle, knowing glint in his eye as Karen protested, oblivious to the imminent consequences of her own actions. It was a scene so perfectly balanced between absurdity and justice that I couldn't help but feel grateful for witnessing it firsthand, even as the lingering stress tried to sneak back into my chest. One of my friends nudged me gently, pointing toward the fence. "You realize this is going to go viral, right?" he said, grinning in that conspiratorial way friends do when they know something incredible just happened. I raised an eyebrow, amused. "Viral? In our neighborhood?" I asked, though in truth, the thought didn't seem far-fetched. A simple video of Karen's dramatic overreaction, juxtaposed with her husband's calm intervention, could spread like wildfire on social media. The entire scenario was almost cinematic in its absurdity. I had to admit, a small part of me felt a surge of pride at being at the center of such an unintentionally entertaining moment. The grill hissed as I moved the remaining sausages, the sound comforting, grounding me in the tactile reality of cooking while chaos lingered just outside my fence. I began arranging the food on the plates, the aroma filling the space, a delicate counterpoint to the lingering tension. My friends dug in, their laughter gradually reclaiming dominance over the unease, and I joined them, taking bites of perfectly cooked ribs and savoring the smoky, charred flavor. The conversation inevitably returned to speculation about what had just happened. They asked questions, of course, questions I didn't have all the answers to, questions about the legality, the timing, the reason Karen's husband had waited so long to act. I smiled, deflecting with vague amusement, because some things, I realized, were better left unexamined in detail. The more you try to rationalize chaos, the more it seems to mock you. And yet, curiosity was natural. One friend, ever the inquisitor, pressed, "So, what exactly did he arrest her for?" "I mean, I get she's crazy, but this feels like something bigger." I shrugged, savoring a bite of burger before answering. "Honestly? From what I gather, it wasn't anything to do with me or the barbecue. Some paperwork, some old charges that caught up with her. I think she just had the timing wrong, and maybe the wrong target." They exchanged incredulous looks, shaking their heads, half laughing, half stunned. The notion that Karen's obsession with control could be her own undoing resonated deeply. It felt almost karmic in its execution. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the backyard, turning the scene into a warm, orange-tinted tableau. The grill's smoke spiraled upward, catching the light, and I felt an odd sense of serenity amidst the lingering tension. It was one of those rare, reflective moments where the chaotic events of the day could be absorbed fully, appreciated for their narrative richness, and allowed to settle into memory. The air was now cooler, carrying hints of late summer grass, faint exhaust from a passing car, and the mingling sense of cooked meat and wood smoke. Each breath felt grounding, as if life were reminding me that, even when absurdity strikes, there is a space to savor the simple joys. I leaned back against the fence, watching the friends around me laugh and share stories, and realized that this was what mattered most, the human connections, the small celebrations of ordinary pleasures, and the private victories over petty interference. Karen's antics, her overzealous call to 911, her husband's quiet but authoritative response, all of it became background texture to the reality that life continued, that joy could still be carved out in small, deliberate ways. The phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from another neighbor asking if everything was okay. I typed back a brief, reassuring message, careful not to indulge in the drama further. It was incredible how quickly a moment of chaos could ripple outward, reaching places you never intended, altering perceptions, and creating stories that would outlive their original context. My friends noticed my distraction and nudged me again. "Don't tell me you're going to start writing a book about this," one joked, half serious, half laughing. I smiled wryly. In truth, I considered it, not a book in the traditional sense, but a detailed mental archive of the day's events, to be recalled whenever life seemed absurd and needed perspective. The ribs had cooled slightly, but the satisfaction of cooking and sharing remained untouched, intact as a small anchor of normalcy in an otherwise bizarre day. I took a final sip of beer, feeling the tension of the day slowly dissolve into the warm evening air. The faint sound of distant traffic and a neighborhood dog barking occasionally reminded me that the world outside my fence continued unabated, oblivious to the dramatic events that had just unfolded here. And yet, in my little backyard, surrounded by friends, laughter, and the fading glow of sunset, I felt a profound sense of contentment. Life, it seemed, could be chaotic, absurd, and hilariously ironic, but it could also be savored, piece by piece, bite by bite, smoke by smoke, in the company of those who mattered most. The grill was now cold enough to touch without discomfort, the plates cleared, and the day slowly giving way to night, but the story of Karen's audacious call and her husband's intervention lingered in the air, a story that would grow in retelling, exaggerated slightly each time, yet rooted in the undeniable truth of irony, timing, and human folly. And I, quietly, smiled to myself, savoring both the meal and the moment, knowing that this backyard, my friends, and the chaos-turned comedy of life were mine to enjoy, fully, hilariously, and without apology. As night began to settle over the neighborhood, the warm glow of my backyard lights cast long, gentle shadows across the patio, illuminating the lingering aftermath of the day's chaos. The stars were beginning to pierce the twilight, faint pinpricks of light scattered across a deepening indigo sky, as if the universe itself were silently observing the absurdity and resolution of the events that had unfolded. My friends lingered around the table, some leaning back in their chairs, others quietly scrolling on their phones to check if word of the arrest had spread across social media. It was strange to think that what began as a simple barbecue, a humble gathering designed to savor ribs, burgers, and laughter, had transformed into a spectacle that blurred the line between suburban drama and farce. I found myself walking over to the fence and peering toward the street, half expecting to see Karen's car returning, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. But the street was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, the occasional passing car breaking the silence like a punctuation mark in an otherwise serene sentence. It was in this quiet, punctuated by distant hums and bird calls settling in for the night, that I truly began to absorb the magnitude of what had occurred. Karen, in her single-minded obsession with enforcing her idea of order, had inadvertently created a scenario where her own authority and credibility crumbled spectacularly, all within the view of the neighbors who, undoubtedly, had now begun quietly documenting the incident for their own amusement and future gossip. I shook my head slightly, chuckling to myself, and took a slow sip of the warm beer that had long since lost its chill. The taste was comforting, grounding me in the tangible reality of my backyard, a sensory reminder that life, even when absurd, continued to offer small, ordinary pleasures. My thoughts drifted to Karen's husband, the quiet, deliberate force behind the arrest. I had never met someone whose presence alone could so completely redefine a situation without raising their voice or exhibiting even the slightest impatience. There was a calm authority in his movements, a precision in his timing, and a subtle assurance that demanded recognition and respect without requiring explanation. Watching him that afternoon, I realized how often people wield power and influence subtly, allowing the situation to unfold until it reaches a critical tipping point, at which time they act with unassailable clarity. It was almost mesmerizing to witness, especially in contrast to Karen's frantic, high-energy attempts to assert control in a manner that was both performative and tragically ineffective. My friends noticed the shift in my demeanor and nudged me, teasing me for staring contemplatively into the night sky instead of digging into the last of the food. "You're spacing out, man." "That's not like you," one of them said, half smiling, sensing the combination of amusement and reflection playing across my features. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Just thinking about what just happened. It's not every day you host a barbecue that turns into a full-scale suburban drama," I replied, my voice low but carrying the weight of genuine reflection. We all shared a quiet laugh at that, the kind that acknowledges both absurdity and relief. Slowly, the conversation drifted from Karen and her miscalculations to lighter, more mundane topics, work stories, upcoming events, and the usual banter among friends who had weathered countless ordinary and extraordinary Saturdays together. But even as the topics shifted, the lingering presence of that afternoon's events colored everything. I realized how quickly people's perceptions can be skewed by emotion, assumption, and misunderstanding. Karen had operated under the illusion that she could dictate my actions and impose her idea of legality, and yet, the reality, simple, practical, undeniable, had demonstrated the futility of her interference. Her actions, so calculated in her mind, had ultimately been undermined by her own oversight, the presence of someone more authoritative, calm, and observant than she could anticipate. It was a lesson in humility, timing, and the subtle mechanics of control. I returned to the grill area, where the final remnants of food had cooled but still radiated warmth. The smoke had dissipated, leaving a faint trace of mesquite and charcoal in the air, a sensory bookmark that would forever remind me of this peculiar day. I wiped down the surfaces, stacking plates and utensils neatly, the repetitive motion serving as a soothing contrast to the mental replay of events. My friends joined in, helping with cleanup while recounting exaggerated versions of the arrest, their animated gestures painting a scene even more ridiculous than what had actually transpired. We laughed, teasing each other about our respective roles in the day's narrative, knowing that the memories being created would be retold countless times in various forms, some dramatic, some humorous, and some absurdly embellished. I realized, in that moment, that these shared experiences, this combination of camaraderie, irony, and unexpected drama, were the essence of what made life rich and memorable. The simple act of cooking and sharing food had become a catalyst for storytelling, reflection, and a quiet understanding of human nature's capacity for both folly and resilience. As darkness enveloped the neighborhood, I turned my gaze toward my house, noticing how the warm lights spilled from the windows, creating a welcoming glow that contrasted sharply with the lingering tension outside. I thought about the ways in which physical spaces, the boundaries of fences, the warmth of lights, the containment of one's own backyard, serve as both sanctuary and stage, places where private life intersects with public observation. My property, in particular, had become a theater for both humor and justice, a location where the absurdity of human behavior was highlighted against the backdrop of ordinary domestic life. The night deepened, and the friends who remained slowly began to depart, each offering handshakes, pats on the back, and quiet words of admiration for the way the day had unfolded. The silence left behind was profound, a mixture of relief, reflection, and residual adrenaline. I walked along the perimeter of the backyard, noting the subtle disturbances from earlier, the slightly shifted chairs, the faint scuff marks on the patio, the traces of smoke still clinging faintly to the air. Each detail acted as a reminder that, while the chaos had been resolved, its impact remained imprinted on both space and memory. I settled into my lounge chair, the fabric cool beneath me, and sipped the final remnants of my beer. The night was calm, serene, and filled with a sense of private triumph. I thought about Karen once more, imagining the conversations she would have to endure over the coming days, the embarrassment of her arrest, the inevitable gossip, the quiet realization that her attempt at control had backfired spectacularly. There was a certain poetic justice in it, a narrative symmetry that was both satisfying and humbling. I reflected on the way life sometimes orchestrates its lessons, not through confrontation or deliberate planning, but through timing, circumstance, and the unerring presence of forces we may not fully understand. Karen's obsession with authority had met its match, not in argument or escalation, but in the quiet, precise application of power by someone entirely unexpected. It was, I thought, a reminder that control is often illusory and that patience, calmness, and observation are far more effective tools than anger, interference, or dramatics. As I leaned back and gazed upward, the stars now fully visible in the clear night sky, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. My barbecue, initially intended as a simple pleasure, had become a microcosm of life itself, unpredictable, absurd, and yet full of small victories and moments of clarity. I smiled to myself, appreciating the irony, the humor, and the deeper lessons tucked into what had otherwise seemed like a routine Saturday. By the time the cool night air prompted me to retreat inside, I carried with me not just the memory of perfectly cooked ribs and the laughter of friends, but also the vivid recollection of chaos resolved, folly corrected, and the subtle triumph of patience and observation. The events of the day would linger in my mind, a rich narrative of irony and justice, a story that would be retold and remembered, not just for its absurdity, but for the quiet, satisfying resolution that left the backyard, my friends, and I intact, victorious in the most unexpected of ways. The next morning, the neighborhood awoke to a mixture of curiosity, whispered gossip, and cautious admiration, the events of the previous day already circulating in hushed conversations over fences, coffee, and the faint hum of early lawnmowers. I stepped outside, stretching and inhaling the crisp, sunlit air, the lingering scent of yesterday's barbecue mingling faintly with the morning dew. My backyard, now quiet and orderly, seemed almost untouched by the chaos, yet every blade of grass, every fence post, and every slight indentation on the patio told a subtle story of the drama that had unfolded. I walked toward the grill, inspecting it carefully, marveling at how it had endured the tension without a scratch, the coals fully cooled but still radiating a faint warmth, as if acknowledging the absurd theater that had taken place over its surface. The neighbors' glances began immediately, subtle, quick, and filled with curiosity, some smiling, some exchanging discreet nods that communicated silent congratulations, as though we had all collectively witnessed an event worthy of neighborhood legend. I smiled politely in return, savoring the satisfaction that came not from pride in confrontation, but from the quiet validation of having exercised patience, good sense, and self-control in the midst of absurdity. My friends, who had stayed overnight or arrived early for a morning coffee, now began recounting the arrest and its aftermath with gleeful exaggeration, each retelling transforming yesterday's chaos into a story bordering on myth. I swear, he didn't even raise his voice, one murmured, eyes wide in amazement, and she just fell apart like a house of cards. I nodded, sipping a fresh cup of coffee, silently agreeing, letting them continue their animated narration. It was fascinating to observe how quickly narratives form, how ordinary events can become legendary, and how human imagination amplifies irony and humor in ways reality alone rarely achieves. As I prepared breakfast, arranging the remnants of yesterday's meats into simple sandwiches and reheating sides, I reflected on the deeper significance of the day's events. Karen's attempt to assert authority over my barbecue had been both audacious and utterly misguided. It was a stark reminder of the fragile illusion of control, the tendency for people to overreach, and the unpredictable ways in which life can correct misjudgments. Her husband's presence and decisive action highlighted a truth I had witnessed firsthand: authority, exercised calmly and correctly, is far more effective than hysteria or performance-driven intervention. I considered the likely conversations she would have in the coming days, the disbelief of her neighbors, the humiliation of friends and family privy to the story, and the inevitable personal reflection prompted by the arrest. It was ironic, almost beautifully so, that in attempting to enforce perceived rules, she had created a personal narrative that reflected her own overreach more than any wrongdoing on my part. My thoughts drifted to the broader dynamics of our neighborhood, the web of unspoken rules, HOA regulations, and the subtle tensions that exist beneath the surface of what appears to be idyllic suburban life. I realized that what had occurred was more than just a localized incident. It was a lesson in human behavior, a case study in assumptions, authority, and the delicate balance between interference and personal freedom. Breakfast prepared, we gathered once more in the backyard, this time under the gentle warmth of the morning sun, a stark contrast to the intense afternoon and evening of the previous day. Conversations were lighter, laughter more genuine, tempered by the shared memory of yesterday's absurdity. I observed the subtle relief in my friends' eyes, the recognition that they had witnessed an event that would be told for years, each retelling growing in legend and humor, yet grounded in the undeniable truth of timing, authority, and human folly. As I arranged plates and poured coffee, I allowed myself to reflect on my own response throughout the ordeal. The satisfaction I derived was not from conflict, but from composure, from understanding when to act and when to allow life's natural course to resolve the chaos. Karen had acted, predictably, impulsively and dramatically. I had responded, calmly and measured, and the contrast was evident in the unfolding resolution. I realized that life often rewards patience, observation, and emotional control far more than impulsive action or performative assertiveness. The morning passed slowly, filled with the quiet sounds of birds, distant traffic, and the soft clinking of utensils as we prepared a simple, satisfying meal. I watched my friends interact, their laughter punctuating the soft breeze, and felt a profound sense of contentment. The chaos of yesterday had passed, leaving behind stories, lessons, and a reinforced sense of personal autonomy. Later in the day, as I moved around the yard, I noticed subtle changes, small gestures of neighborly acknowledgement, quiet smiles from those who had witnessed or heard of the event, and a lingering sense that the balance of power and respect in the neighborhood had subtly shifted. Karen's audacity had inadvertently created a cautionary tale, one that others would quietly remember as a demonstration of hubris and its consequences. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not in her downfall, but in the reaffirmation that reason, patience, and calm action often carry greater weight than noise, aggression, or petty obsession. As the sun dipped toward the horizon once more, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet, I cleaned the last of the dishes and looked around my backyard, absorbing the tranquility, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the quiet satisfaction of a space reclaimed, peaceful, and secure. The day, which had begun like any ordinary Saturday, had unfolded into a narrative rich with irony, humor, and subtle moral clarity. It was, I realized, a story worth remembering, not just for the amusement or the drama, but for the lessons embedded in every tense moment, every exaggerated claim, and every unexpected intervention. My friends gradually departed, leaving me alone with the soft twilight, the cooling patio, and the lingering smell of smoked meat that had once symbolized both joy and absurd conflict. I stood at the edge of my yard, taking a deep breath, and reflected on the delicate balance of freedom and interference, authority and humility, patience and impulsiveness. The day had been a vivid reminder that life rarely unfolds according to plan, that human nature is unpredictable, and that the simple act of maintaining composure can yield outcomes more satisfying than any confrontation or argument. As night finally settled in, the stars twinkling faintly above, I felt a profound sense of closure. The barbecue, my friends, the laughter, and the absurdity of Karen's interference had coalesced into a vivid story, a testament to human folly, cosmic irony, and the quiet satisfaction of standing firm, enjoying life on my own terms, and letting events unfold naturally. I stepped back inside my home, the warmth of the lights embracing me, the memory of laughter and smoke lingering like an echo of yesterday's triumph. Karen's call to 911, her dramatic protests, and her husband's decisive action would live on in neighborhood lore, but for me, the real victory was quiet, subtle, and deeply personal, the reaffirmation of autonomy, patience, and the understanding that sometimes, the most powerful response is calm observation, trust in the natural course of events, and the simple act of enjoying a well-cooked meal in peace.